The bank manager slid the closing documents across the desk and said, with a professionally warm smile, "Mr. Harmon, we just need your signature on pages 411 and the final disclosure page, and the transfer will be complete." And the man sitting across from him, wearing my husband's jacket, my husband's watch, my husband's wedding ring, which I still don't fully understand how he obtained, picked up the pen and began to sign. I was standing in the doorway of that office, having arrived 4 minutes late because of a parking situation I will never stop being furious about, and I watched the man at that desk sign my husband's name on a document that would have transferred the deed to our home, our paid-off, fully owned, $430,000 home, into a shell company I had never heard of in a transaction my husband had absolutely no knowledge of, because my husband was, at that exact moment, sitting in a hospital waiting room across town, waiting for his mother's post-surgical consultation. I knew it wasn't my husband for one reason, and one reason only. The man at that desk was wearing short sleeves. My husband never wears short sleeves in public. Not because of any particular insecurity. Simply because of a habit formed in childhood. One he's maintained so consistently over 22 years of marriage that I genuinely cannot picture him in short sleeves outside of our own bedroom. And on the inside of my husband's left forearm, just below the elbow. Visible now on the man at that desk because of those short sleeves. There was no birthmark. My husband has a birthmark on the inside of his left forearm, just below the elbow. A small, irregular patch, roughly the size of a thumbnail, that I have kissed approximately 10,000 times over 22 years of marriage. The man at that desk had smooth, unmarked skin on his left forearm. He was not my husband. He was my husband's twin brother, Ryan, and he was about to steal our house. Before I tell you exactly what happened in the next 6 minutes, tell me, where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? I read every comment, genuinely, and this community means more to me than I know how to properly say. I also want to be clear, before we go further, this is a work of fiction, written for entertainment. The names, the people, the events, none of it is real, and any resemblance to anyone living is entirely coincidental. My name is Donna Harmon. I'm 53 years old, and for 22 years, I have been married to a man named Kevin. Steady, warm, a semi-retired contractor who still takes on small renovation projects because, as he says, he genuinely doesn't know what to do with his hands when he isn't building something. Kevin has an identical twin brother named Ryan. I want to take a moment to explain what identical means in practical terms when you've been married to one of them for 22 years. Because I think people who haven't lived close to a set of identical twins sometimes misunderstand the degree to which two people can share a face and still be, in almost every meaningful way, entirely different people. Kevin and Ryan are the same height, the same build, the same hair color. Now both silver at the temples, salt and pepper in the same distribution, the way genetics sometimes produces a kind of eerie synchronicity even across separately lived decades. They have the same voice, nearly the same pitch, same cadence, though Kevin has a very slight hesitation before he laughs that Ryan doesn't have, a detail I noticed in the first year of our relationship and have never lost track of since. They have the same face. But Kevin has a birthmark on the inside of his left forearm, a small, irregular patch that Ryan does not have. A distinction that emerged in early childhood, possibly a vascular irregularity that Kevin developed and Ryan didn't, the kind of thing that happens occasionally in identical twin development. I have known about that birthmark since our third date, when Kevin rolled up his sleeves to help me carry boxes up a staircase, and I noticed it and asked. And he said, "Oh, that." Ryan and I used to use that to settle arguments about who was who in old photographs. He laughed when he said it, that specific half-second hesitation before the laugh that is his alone. I filed it away the way you file away small, specific details about people you are beginning to love. You don't know, at the time, which details will matter. You simply keep them. That detail was about to matter enormously. Kevin and Ryan's relationship had been complicated for most of their adult lives, in the specific, particular way that identical twin relationships sometimes become complicated when one twin's life diverges significantly from the other's in terms of stability and success. Kevin had built his contracting business steadily over 3 decades. Modest, dependable, the kind of work that compounds over time into genuine financial security. He'd bought our house 20 years ago, paid it off 11 years ago, and maintained it with the kind of pride a builder takes in anything he owns. Ryan had made different choices. I say that without judgment, or as little judgment as I can honestly manage. Because some of Ryan's choices had been genuinely unlucky rather than purely reckless, and because Kevin loved his brother in that deep, inarticulate way of people who share a face and a childhood and can never fully disentangle themselves from what that means, regardless of how far their lives have diverged. Ryan had started and lost 2 businesses over the past 15 years. He had gone through a divorce 8 years ago that had left him financially strained in ways he'd never fully recovered from. He had borrowed money from Kevin on at least 6 separate occasions that I knew of, amounts ranging from $3,000 to, on one occasion that Kevin told me about with visible discomfort, $18,000, none of which had ever been repaid. Kevin kept lending it. I kept watching him do it, and I kept having the same conversation with him, gently, and Kevin kept saying the same thing. He's my brother, Donna. He's me in a different life. I can't just watch him drown. I understood that impulse. I did. But I also watched Ryan, over 15 years, become gradually, almost imperceptibly, something other than simply a man in difficult circumstances. I watched a specific kind of entitlement develop, the belief, quiet but persistent, that Kevin's stability was a resource Ryan was owed access to, rather than something Kevin had built through choices Ryan himself had declined to make. I never said this to Kevin in exactly those words. I said adjacent things over the years, and Kevin heard them and loved me and kept lending Ryan money anyway. What I hadn't anticipated, what neither of us had anticipated, was that Ryan would eventually stop asking. The property transfer scheme, as the detective who eventually handled the case explained it to us, had apparently been in planning for almost 4 months. Ryan had, at some point during that period, obtained Kevin's social security number. Almost certainly through a piece of mail he'd intercepted during a period 2 years earlier when he'd briefly stayed with us while between apartments. A period Kevin had insisted on and that I'd accommodated because, as I've noted, Kevin loved his brother. He had used that number, combined with Kevin's date of birth and a driver's license he had apparently obtained through a process the detective described as disturbingly straightforward given the existing identity overlap. The 2 men's photographs being, as you would expect, essentially interchangeable, to establish a fraudulent identity package sufficient to pass the verification requirements of a small regional title company that had been contracted to handle the property transfer. He had also, and this detail still makes something cold move through my chest when I think about it, apparently spent several weeks studying Kevin's signature. The signatures on the documents at the bank were, according to the forensic handwriting examiner, close enough to Kevin's authentic signature that they would likely have passed without scrutiny. Ryan had chosen that particular Tuesday for the closing because he knew. I still don't know exactly how, that Kevin would be at the hospital with his mother for most of the day. He had worn Kevin's wedding ring, which he'd apparently taken during a visit to our house the previous month, pocketed quietly while Kevin was in another room. A theft Kevin hadn't yet noticed because he'd assumed he'd simply misplaced it. He had worn short sleeves. That was the mistake. That single, small, almost trivial choice. Short sleeves instead of long on a November morning in Charlotte, at a bank closing where he needed to maintain an impersonation for perhaps 20 minutes, was the thing that unraveled everything. Because I had arrived 4 minutes late, and I had seen his left forearm. I stood in the doorway of that bank office for perhaps 3 full seconds. The specific suspended time of a mind moving very fast through a situation it is simultaneously trying to confirm and refusing to fully believe. Then I walked in. "Kevin," I said. The man at the desk looked up, and I watched. In the fraction of a second, before his expression rearranged itself into something more composed. The specific flicker of a person who has just heard an unexpected variable arrive in a situation they believed was controlled. Kevin doesn't flicker like that. Kevin looks up from whatever he's doing when I come into a room the same way he always has. Open, warm, that half second before the smile. 22 years, and I know that look the way I know his voice. This man looked up the way someone looks up when they're startled and need a moment to decide what their face should do next. "Hey," he said. "I thought you were waiting in the car. I decided to come in." I said, my voice entirely. Surprisingly calm. The calm of someone who has understood something and is now simply managing the next 60 seconds with great care. "Can I see your arm for a second?" A pause. Very brief. "What?" "Your left arm," I said. "Roll up your sleeve." The bank manager looked between us with polite, professional confusion. The pen was still in Ryan's hand. The documents were half signed on the desk. Ryan. And I was entirely certain now, with a certainty I didn't need any additional evidence to confirm. said, Donna, what are you? Roll up your sleeve. I said again, still calm. Or I'm going to call the police right now and tell them that the man sitting at this desk is not Kevin Harmon and that the transaction currently being processed is fraudulent. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Ryan set the pen down on the desk. I called Kevin first. He answered on the second ring, his voice distracted, the particular background murmur of a hospital waiting room audible behind him. Donna? Everything okay? Kevin, I said, stepping just outside the office doorway while the bank manager, to his enormous credit, had already quietly reached for his own phone. I need you to tell me exactly where you are right now. I'm at Mercy General. Mom's consultation ran long. They're still. Stay there, I said. Don't leave. I need to call you back in 10 minutes. Donna, what's 10 minutes? I said. I love you. Stay exactly where you are. I hung up and called the police. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg police arrived within 8 minutes. 2 officers, followed shortly by a detective named Warren, who took one look at the situation. The fraudulent driver's license, the half-signed documents, the shell company name on the transfer paperwork, Ryan sitting in that chair with the specific stillness of a man who has understood, in the past 6 minutes, that there is no version of this situation he is walking out of easily, and began asking questions with the methodical, unhurried efficiency of someone who has seen enough fraud cases to know exactly what he's looking at. Ryan gave his real name without being asked. I think in some part of him there was almost a relief in it. The specific exhaustion of a man who has been maintaining something unsustainable and has just watched it finally collapse. The bank manager provided immediately and cooperatively the full documentation of the transaction as it had been initiated. The fraudulent identity package Ryan had used, the shell company details, the correspondence history leading up to the scheduled closing. The title company that had processed the preliminary paperwork was contacted within the hour. Kevin arrived at the bank 40 minutes later, still in the clothes he'd worn to the hospital, his face cycling through an expression I had never seen on him. The specific, layered devastation of someone who loves a person and has just learned exactly how completely that love was being exploited. He looked at Ryan for a long time without speaking. Ryan didn't look back. He looked at the floor, his hands in his lap, the wedding ring still on his finger. Kevin walked over, slowly, and held out his hand, palm up. Ryan took the ring off and placed it in Kevin's hand without a word. Kevin closed his fingers around it, turned, and walked back to where I was standing by the door. He didn't say anything. He just put his arm around me, and we stood there while the detective finished his questions, and outside the bank window, the November afternoon was already going gray and cold and entirely ordinary in the way that days are ordinary, while something enormous is quietly finishing itself in a room nearby. Ryan was charged with identity theft, forgery, attempted real estate fraud, and theft of personal property. The wedding ring constituting a separate count that Kevin, when the detective asked if he wanted to include it, said after a long pause, yes, include it. The case, given the documentation, was not complicated. The fraudulent driver's license, the identity package, the shell company. All of it traceable, all of it documented, all of it considerably less sophisticated than Ryan had apparently believed it was when he planned it. The forensic handwriting examiner confirmed the signature discrepancy. The fingerprint comparison. Ryan's prints taken at booking, compared against Kevin's authentic prints on file from a contractor's license application 12 years earlier. Confirmed the identity distinction that Ryan had apparently believed the birthmark detail made irrelevant. Ryan pleaded guilty to a consolidated fraud charge. He was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for early release after 28 months contingent on good behavior and mandatory financial restitution counseling. Kevin visited him once in the first month. He came home from that visit quieter than I had seen him in years, and he sat at our kitchen table for a long time without saying anything, and then he said, he told me he'd been planning it for 4 months. He said he kept thinking he would stop, that he'd find another way to solve the money problem. And then he just didn't stop. I sat down across from him, and I took his hand. He's still your brother. I said, that's still true. But what he did is also true. Both things are true at the same time. Kevin nodded slowly. I know, he said. I just keep thinking. He has my face. He has my exact face. And I kept trying to figure out how I would have had to become a completely different person, somewhere along the way, to do what he did. You didn't become that person, I said. No, he said. I didn't. He looked at the wedding ring on his hand, the one I had watched him close his fingers around in that bank, the one that had been on Ryan's hand an hour earlier, the one he'd worn every day for 22 years. He turned it slowly on his finger, the way he sometimes does when he's thinking. How did you know? He asked, the moment you walked in. How did you know immediately? I looked at him across our kitchen table. His face, which I have known for 22 years, which I know so well I can read in the dark. Your arm, I said. He was wearing short sleeves. Kevin looked down at his own left forearm, at the small, irregular birthmark just below the elbow. He was quiet for a moment, then the half-second hesitation, then the laugh. 22 years, he said, and that's what saved our house. 22 years, I said, and I know every single inch of you. The house is still ours. The deed, needless to say, remains exactly where it has always been. The shell company Ryan had established was dissolved by court order within 60 days, its assets. Minimal, as it turned out. Liquidated as partial restitution. Kevin still takes on small renovation projects. He still doesn't know what to do with his hands when he isn't building something. He still wears long sleeves in public, without exception, a habit so ingrained it will likely outlast us both. And sometimes in the evenings, when we're sitting together on the porch of the house we've owned for 20 years and paid off for 11, I look at the inside of his left forearm, that small, irregular patch just below the elbow, and I think about how many things in a long marriage are invisible to everyone outside of it. All the small, specific, unremarkable details that accumulate quietly over decades. All the things you notice without knowing you're noticing them. All the ways a person becomes over time are entirely known to the one person paying close enough attention. Ryan had Kevin's face. He had Kevin's voice, his height, his build, his signature, his social security number, and his wedding ring. He didn't have 22 years. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Do you think Kevin was right to visit Ryan in prison, or would you have cut contact entirely? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, subscribe to the Family Ledger for a brand new story every